So, at this point, it's really rather self-evident. We are moving into a new age, one where autonomous drone systems play a far more important role. And swarming is developing, and small-scale UAS is becoming more practical as a concept within the battle space, particularly that of, really quite small combat drones. Now, in this video, I'm going to give you a concept combat drone system. Now, this system doesn't, of course, exist yet, but I think its role is something that we're likely to see in the strategic future. We can talk about swarms of drones all we like, but the concept of them moving as a flock, as it were, would probably not be so cost-effective in large-scale combat, particularly at the moment. And generally, what is used would be something that is more cost-effective, particularly considering that for something as small as, let's say, a drone swarm, you're not going to be paying that much, particularly considering that, higher expense units are generally larger vehicles of some sort that have, huge firepower or huge transport capability, huge and hardy machines of war. Now, in any case, my point today is to really think about what is going to be the next concept when it comes to these drones. And what I think that is effectively organization and cooperation, communication among drones in order to achieve tactical aims, particularly as a prerequisite to drone swarms being used, and that's especially pertinent to the air arena, potentially even in attacking ground units. It's really a sort of stepping stone with a more simple, cost-effective technology before large-scale swarming is made possible. It's not swarming, but it is coordination. Now, I've talked about interceptor drones before, and generally the concept with that at the moment is simple. It's a heavy, fast drone that really zooms towards a threatening drone and then whacks it really hard enough to make it inoperable, and ideally to make it crash. Now, the concept of the Interceptor is actually a lot like that of a surface-to-air missile. Much like the missile, it zooms towards the target and hits it hard enough to destroy it. In the former case, with its own airframe, it literally whacks itself into it, it rams it, and with the latter, with the effects of a directed, high-explosive blast fragmentation warhead. But effectively, what if we could combine these concepts? That's the question. What if we were to combine these concepts in order to basically reduce the munition chance of miss? Missiles, which are incredibly effective, but they really miss for only one of three reasons. Either failure of targeting systems, that could be either technologically or due to countermeasures, or they may be targeted themselves and neutralised as a threat via gun systems, lasers or other missiles, or potentially they are avoided. That is to say that the thing they're trying to hit outmaneuvers them. And then once they're past the target and they have missed, they are unable to re-engage because effectively they whiz past. This is particularly for really the air-to-air sphere. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today reduces the first of these issues, the failure of targeting systems, the effectiveness of countermeasures. It means that reference points are less fallible for targeting. It reduces the issue of high-speed missiles missing their target and not being able to return. And it only really leaves the issue of getting shot down, which in a sort of communicative structure is far more difficult, despite the fact it's not technically swarming. Now, here is how the concept effectively works. And likely with today's technology, it would work best with the neutralisation of helicopter units. So imagine the scenario: 12 launch pods, each containing 3 drones. These drones have rotational quad propellers, a central axiom containing a rotatable seeker head, and at the top or bottom is the seeker head, as well as a directional warhead. And it's about the size of probably a small desk in width, with a central column being about the size of 2 Jaffa Cake double packs. Now, each launcher deploys a drone, a single drone, leaving 2 in reserve when they sense a helicopter is coming onto the radar. Each drone quickly launches and enters formation. 12, they're not swarming drones, but 12 coordinated drones arrange themselves in a sort of spherical shape, surrounding this helicopter the same way that they exist around an axis when they're making a Christmas tree display of some sort. And at this point, the sphere could be 10 miles in diameter, with each 5 miles away from this helicopter. Drones above, north, south, east, and west. And ideally beneath as well. Now, as the helicopter moves, they move with it. They move in this pattern, in this rigid formation, potentially even shifting position so as to best avoid strike against themselves, and best avoid being targeted. And effectively, they can utilize active data links to share targeting, location, and just general data. All in all, it's nearly impossible to lose a lock on the helicopter when there are 12 constantly working seekers. It means that if one is tricked by countermeasures, if one has a technological failure, the communication still keeps up. And even if one fails entirely, the rest are still there to communicate and effectively stay on task. Now, as these drones remain in formation around the helicopter, it sends a message back to base. These have been automatically triggered, and those in charge can gain the information that these drones have. They can decide what the next move could be, likely utilizing 3D visual mapping of terrain, of the helicopter itself, and they realize, let's say, that this helicopter is coming towards a major asset within their area, and there they really give the command for the drones to engage. Now, it could be over the course of a minute, or it could be over the course of an hour. But the drones then constrict, making their spherical formation smaller and smaller. They've effectively surrounded this helicopter in a 3D sense, and that is largely where difficulty lies if you're trying to surround an aircraft, is that it's three-dimensional, unlike on the ground where it's really two-dimensional. You can only surround them, north, south, east, and west. For airborne assets, it has to be all around. It has to be a spherical formation. Now, these drones constrict, and thus I'd probably dub this the Anaconda system. As they move in, they hold this spherical formation. The helicopter cannot leave this formation if it wanted to, and any attempt to move out of it is not only not effective, but it would be met by one of these drones. Each of these drones close in until they're about 100 meters away from the helicopter. The helicopter has no real means by which it can remove itself from the situation. And then each of these drones, either in volleys or simultaneously, would be able to utilize the same concept as the Interceptor, and the same concept as the missile. They fly towards this helicopter at reasonably high speed. And again, if they did this in unison, then the helicopter has no way to move out of the area of risk, at which point, upon becoming proximal to the helicopter, they could activate an attached warhead, which is likely directional. Think of it like a claymore in the sky, only it can turn around. Or even just, directed high explosive blast fragmentation warhead. And then, of course, there is a successful strike, potentially from all 12 of these munitions, but realistically only a few of these Anaconda drones, because you don't want all striking at once. But the point is, worst case scenario, the likelihood of them missing is not high. But worst case scenario, one misses, two miss. And then they can reorient themselves. They can set up a spherical framework again. Now they could, once they have struck the target, utilize interceptor restabilization, and I know that that's not really a word, but I'm going to use it anyway, and they would be able to recover and be used again, and likely their movement speed towards the helicopter itself in the terminal phase of strike would be counteracted by the explosion, allowing them not to smash into the target itself, and ideally return back to the pod, which again, ideally would have some sort of munition replenishment system, or if not, it can return back to base to be replenished, prior to returning to its pod for maybe refueling. Now, even in the presence of these drones, the helicopter would likely be forced to land. And this is something, it effectively forces a tactical situation, and it forces the enemy to play their hand. It would be, one could argue that it would be a far better solution, considering that this would reduce human loss of life, as well as increase information collection, and the fact that your enemy now can't use a helicopter if it's forced to land. So these drones can destroy a helicopter without the people inside, which is positive. and they can surround particular areas and effectively block off movement. Now, additionally, let's say it's in its final phase, and it utilized a multi-mode seeker with probably active LiDAR, millimeter wave radar, something similar to a missile, as well as TV sensor confirmation, as you'd expect from a drone, then it's not too likely to be dissuaded by countermeasures, particularly considering these inter-munition data links, the inter-drone data links, and I know that those are not words, but I'm going to use them anyway. Now, you could establish as well a three-dimensional target profile, which would be incredibly important. You effectively construct a three-dimensional prison around any unit that you want to block, any unit that you do not want to move anywhere. It's particularly effective if you can increase coordination among the units. Now, alternatively, if one isn't interested in eliminating the target, it would be pretty adept at neutralisation anyway, and this system is also perfect for electronic warfare. One could form surrounding radar blockers, they could knock out communication, and effectively put this unit, likely a helicopter or potentially even slow-moving aircraft, into the equivalent of a Faraday box. Now, it's the UAS equivalent of the police surrounding your house and slowly moving in. And it's just a thought. While I think missiles are brilliant, I love missiles, but for slightly slower moving targets that you really want to hit, or even faster moving targets which are better able to maneuver and, the majority of the time, the missile cannot reorient itself in order to hit the target once it's missed, this leads to a far lower chance of loss of log. It means that worst case scenario, it can just circle around and the drones can set up the pattern again until they succeed. It leads to better data communications, more control until the last minute, better loitering ability, the ability to use multiple times and retrieve the unit itself, the ability to put these into autonomous pods. So effectively there are some sort of tripwire or an electronic tripwire mechanism, and at the very least, these can autonomously surround and track target prior to getting confirmation of attack either via electronic warfare or via conventional means. Now, of course, this confirmation would be far more simple because you have multiple units with multiple cameras which can corroborate with each other and can provide a 3D image of what is going on, which effectively plays into superior command and control suites. So I think that this might be particularly effective. All in all, much like the Snake, this concept of the Anaconda drone is something that I think is going to be seen probably within the next 6 odd years. It positions itself, lies in wait, and finally constricts the target. But far more than that, it's really an aerial mine. It can collect UAS, it can force compromising of strategic decisions and tactical decisions, and destroy assets. It can loiter and act as a security system. It can loiter and act as area denial for the enemy. And of course, it would be rather difficult to shoot down with anything more than interceptor drones given the distance and pattern it can keep. And again, idealistic Generation Z man that I am, with no engineering proficiency, but this concept doesn't seem beyond the abilities of man, particularly considering that this concept isn't implementing real swarming. That is to say, it would have maybe 1 or 2 of these drones which would be the central drones, around which others could coordinate. A central controller on a Christmas tree drone display. That sort of concept. Additionally, they have targeting information. So they have coordination and spatial understanding in the same way that a missile does. So the only question is now, how does one avoid the interceptor problem? But I think that really is for another day. The concept of these Anaconda drone mines is something that I think could prove quite potent and reasonably cost-effective when we are considering the technology that is normally required for these sorts of advanced drones. So I'll leave it there for today, but food for thought.